Hello everyone and welcome back to Creation Myths. This video is going to be another installment in my ongoing, periodically released series where I give you a short, quick, simple refutation of a common creationist argument. And this time we're going to revisit one we've already talked about. Today we're going to talk about a second way to show that the creationist calculations of a recent mitochondrial Eve, like a mitochondrial Eve 6,000 years ago, are obviously wrong. And that reason is somatic mutations. So very briefly, the background here. You have two kinds of cells in your body. You have germline cells, which will eventually make either egg or sperm. And then you have somatic cells, like skin, muscles, blood cells, everything except your germline. Those somatic cells can't make gametes, and this distinction matters because mutations that occur in your germline might get passed on to your offspring. Most don't, but they could. It's possible. But mutations that happen in your somatic cells can never be passed to your offspring, like mutations in your blood, mutations in your skin. You probably have a lot of those, but your offspring will never inherit them because they're not in your germline. So why are we talking about this? Why did we need that little bit of genetics before we get into this? We're talking about it because creationists look at published studies that have documented the mutation rate in human DNA, and they extrapolate that rate backwards in time in a linear fashion, just infinitely, to calculate what's called the time to most recent common ancestor, or TMRCA, for the human mitochondrial DNA. They do this for other stuff too, but we're talking about mitochondria right now. Now, they do this wrong, but it's a real thing you can do to calculate when the mitochondrial most recent common ancestor, so-called mitochondrial Eve, lived. The simple version of these calculations is that they take the number of mutations you need since that most recent common ancestor and divide that by the number of mutations that occur in a single generation, the per generation mutation rate. When you do that, you get the number of generations back to the most recent common ancestor. Then you multiply by the number of years per generation to get your time to most recent common ancestor. Now, in real life, these calculations are more complicated because mutations don't accumulate in a strictly linear fashion over time, but what I just described is literally what creationists do. In particular, Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson is kind of the progenitor of many of these arguments. So when they do this, they arrive at a time of approximately 6,000 years in the past and say, voila, genetics supports young Earth creationism. Now, it doesn't, obviously, and in an earlier video in this series, I talked about one reason why this argument is wrong, and that reason is Neanderthal DNA. But again, we're doing a different thing here. We're doing somatic mutations, so let's go back to them. Remember, these are mutations that occur in somatic cells, the non-germline cells in your body. And the key thing is that while you experience a ton of somatic mutations in your life, those mutations can never be inherited by your offspring, which means you can't use a per generation mutation rate that includes somatic mutations to calculate your time to most recent common ancestor. You're going to end up with a per generation rate that is way too fast because you're including all of those mutations that can't be inherited. That means you end up with a date that is way too recent. Now prepare yourselves, everyone, because this is going to be shocking. Creationists do it anyway. They do what I just described, even though you can't, for the reason I just described, and creationists just do it anyway. They typically cite two studies, most commonly for this. One of them, this one from 1997, and then another from 2015. In these studies, the authors did not filter out somatic mutations. The researchers sequenced mitochondrial DNA from somatic cells, tallied all the differences, calculated the rate from parent to offspring. Doesn't matter if they were inherited from an earlier individual in a germline mutation, or if they occurred in the somatic tissue of the sampled individuals. All those mutations got thrown into the same pool. And that single thing invalidates all of the calculations that creationists used to arrive at their 6,000-year time to mitochondrial Eve. So if you are having a conversation or a debate with creationists on this topic, get them to that conclusion that we just described. You're really going to have to dog walk them to it, okay? So ask very simple questions and get them to agree at each step. For example, the authors didn't do anything to filter out somatic mutations, right? And then you get them to agree. If they refuse to agree, say they didn't, and move on. And if your opponent continues to argue, you can add, if you think otherwise, pull up the paper and find in the methods where they filtered out somatic mutations. Just show me in the methods where they wrote about how they did it. And specifically, this is a fun one, specifically if they cite the 2015 paper there, Ding et al. 2015, you can say David Neff, he's not really active on YouTube anymore, but he used to be, David Neff emailed Ding and asked, did you filter out somatic mutations? And the answer was no, they didn't. So if they cite that paper, which is the one Jensen uses, just tell them the author says you're wrong, and that's the end of it. Now, either way, however that step in the process goes, don't get bogged down. Move on to the next thing, which is, so the mutation rates in these papers include somatic mutations, right? And once they agree to that, you go to, and somatic mutations are never inherited, right? Now that's an easy one because that's just basic genetics. Everyone should agree to that, and you can move on to the final thing. So the rates from these papers cannot be used to calculate the time to most recent common ancestor, right? Because they include mutations that are not inherited, right? So the rate is wrong, right? As you're having this discussion, you're going to have to stay laser focused on those questions because creationists are going to do all kinds of things to knock you off topic. They'll probably say something about how these rates must be correct because the FBI uses them as one thing you hear all the time that is completely irrelevant to the actual question being discussed. So no matter what, don't take the bait. Stay on each of those questions, point out that the creationist is trying to change the topic, and if they refuse to answer any of those questions, point that out to your audience. You can say they obviously know that the answer hurts them, which is why they are not directly answering a simple question, right? The fact is, creationists don't have an answer to this problem, so you can pin them on it pretty easily. The papers they cite to reach mitochondrial Eve just 6,000 years ago don't filter out somatic mutations. It isn't more complicated than that. So that's a pretty quick way to end the debate on this claim. And try it out next time you are arguing with creationists about the age of mitochondrial Eve, the mitochondrial most recent common ancestor. Thank you for watching. Please remember to hit the like button, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and share the video before you leave. If you would like immediate access to my pre-recorded videos like this, consider becoming a channel member. Members at any level get to see all my pre-recorded videos right when they're uploaded instead of waiting for the public release. Thank you all again for watching, and don't get fooled.